Our latest newsletter is back on the bench there inside the door. If you'd like a copy of our newsletter, there's some there. Also, he has some trifold from Deer Haven. Dee's our featured speaker tonight. World-renowned writer, well-printed, she's written books. She knows everything there is about the depot. It's amazing what's happened there that no one will talk about. So, Dee, go ahead.
Thanks, Jim.
I don't know about that introduction, though. I definitely don't know everything of everything. But welcome. I'm glad everybody came out tonight. It's nice to have you here. Thank you to the folks at home. Thank you for the Historical Society inviting me here tonight. It's an honor to be here. So what's interesting is that, believe it or not, Seneca County, we're well aware of it and everything that's happened here through the years, but believe it or not, we still have one of the best kept secrets here of New York State. And that is of the original former Seneca Army Depot lands, what happened with the land prior to that, and basically that white herd of deer. So being from around here, growing up here or moving into the area and being here for a while, we're familiar with them. But there are people right on the western side of the state that have no clue. I'm talking Rochester, Buffalo, even downstate, Jamestown, even on the western side. They have no clue. And then when you go eastbound to Albany way, there are a lot of people that have no clue about, one, the depot and about our white deer herd. So my intent tonight is to expound a little bit about this history, but my intent is for you to become excited about what I'm going to tell you about, and most certainly don't keep this secret, because we want this secret out. So let's get started here. So if you have ever gone down, which many of us have, down Route 96 or 96A in the town of Romulus for decades, we have seen through those fences of the depot these white deer. So many folks were so awe-inspired by the sight of these deer, and we still are today. But going back in time, and even up until now, when you see one of those deer, they are so awe-inspiring that many people would pull right over to the side of the 55-mile-an-hour highway and try and get a better look of those deer behind those fences. So back in the day, before cell phones, if you were fortunate enough to have a camera in your vehicle, which was very rare, you would be able to get a quick shot of those deer. At the very least, you wanted to just have that connection and just stop and connect for a couple of minutes and get a glimpse before they took off. Now, of course, we've got our cell phones and people will still pull over to the side of the road and try and see these creatures. So these creatures are so mystical that they have that draw. And now, because they've got this hierarchy, so to speak, behind these fences, they are actually considered the largest known herd of whitetail in the world. There is nowhere else that we're aware of on the planet that has this large of a herd of whitetail. Let's take a little closer look here. And mom with her little baby. Beautiful doe, we just caught her getting a little snippet here and there behind the fence. And again, you can see how if you actually were driving by and one of these creatures caught your attention, way back when and even now, you still have that draw. There's just something mystical about them. But to understand their saga, we really need to go back in time. We need to go back to at least to the Iroquois. So we're going to go back a couple of centuries. So that might take a little while. Did you guys bring pillows? You guys at home, grab your pillows. Okay. So back to the Iroquois. So the mighty Six Nation of the Iroquois. settled across New York State, okay? The Cayuga and the Seneca tribes were the ones that had the westernmost territory, so where we are now. The Iroquois were feared by their rivals. They were very highly skilled in warfare methodology, but in the same respect, they were well versed in diplomacy and they really strived for peace. So the Iroquois villagers were actually set up in longhouses, and these longhouses dotted the landscape in between the lakes and beyond. So even when you got over to the Adirondacks, this was their form of living. They were great architecturalists, and they nurtured the land. They had numerous crops and fruit trees, and they held a great reverence for not only the land, but its animal inhabitants. So the Iroquois encouraged being present in the moment. They believed humankind shared the land with all creatures mutually. They were great hunters, great fishermen, but in the same respect, they would never take the life of an animal, even for nourishment, without offering some kind of propitiation. Normally, this came in the form of dance. This was to secure the animal's rebirth, to make sure that its spirit would continue on. So therefore, they believed in the souls of each creature, and they would actually sometimes seek the higher consciousness of those animal creatures for guidance and enlightenment. Okay, let's go back here. That went a little ahead of me, got ahead of me. There we go. So the Iroquois believed that humankind shared the land mutually with its animal inhabitants. So, let's scooch down a little bit here, sorry. So, legend has it that the Iroquois actually had a sighting, rare sighting, way back when, of whitetail deer. And when they had these sightings, they would call these huge tribal councils, and we're talking the entire nation. So each territory would send an elder, and they would have these tribal councils because they believed that seeing this animal in the physical meant that there was a sign from the Great Spirit. So what is it that we're meant to take away from this? So they would go into meditative state, and they actually felt that these animals would give them a connection to a higher consciousness. So in these meditative states, they believed that it would allow for a purifying of one's own spirit. What today we might consider is like a spiritual type of revival. So thanks to that Native American legend, we're made privy today to the site of whitetail being as far back as the 1700s here in this area. So then the Revolutionary War came and went. The Iroquois were dispersed from their lands. They were ravaged, basically, kicked off. The military came through, they got rid of all the crops, the fruit trees, and everything was destroyed and basically burned. So this particular vast acreage between Seneca and Cayuga lakes was abandoned for quite a few decades until post-military families and frontier families decided to eventually settle that area again. When these families came in, they continued to nurture that land again, and they actually built a small village of sorts, and they had generations of children which expanded on that land, and that township was called Candaya, which is also known as Appletown. Now, Candaya was actually believed to be the name of one of the Seneca Native American chiefs who formerly lived in the area. So we're going to fast forward to 1941. And in order to prepare for the possibility of World War II, the government was choosing 4 sites in the United States to build munitions storage facilities. So 1 was built in the Northwest, 1 in the Southwest, 1 in the Southeast, and of course 1 in the Northeast. And that Northeast facility was right here in Seneca County. So these small farm families, now what's going to happen? Well, the government came in and they basically said, we're going to take over these 10,000 plus acres of land and you need to get out of here. Was basically what they said. So these families now, they've been here for generations and generations. Not only were there farms and homesteads, there were churches, there were schoolhouses, there was everything that a small village needed. Some of these participants had 3 weeks notice to get out. Some of these homesteads and small businesses, some of them only had 3 days to get out of their established homesteads. I don't know about you, but if somebody came up to me right now today, think about it, and they said to you, you need to be out in 3 days, would you be able to do it? There would be no way I would be able to do it. And I don't have hundreds of acres of land, I don't have farm equipment, I don't have livestock. I just have a house, and I don't think I'd be able to do it. If these families were basically there, some of them for over 100 years, they had passed down other acreage to other children, and children had built their houses there. So, and realize too, this is July of 1941, so we're just coming off of the Depression era. These people are in an agricultural area, so they're still feeling the effects of that depression. They haven't got their wheels out of the ditch, so to speak, yet. And we're in July, so they're leaving crops in the field, they're leaving berries on the bushes, they're leaving fruit on the fruit trees. This is their sustenance, not only for them that day and that season, but they were going to be freezing and canning and putting stuff away for the winter time, let alone bringing stuff to market in order to produce some more monetary supplement to the household. All that had to be relinquished and walked away from. Compensation, unfortunately, for these families was much under the retail value of these farmsteads, and most of these families didn't see compensation for many, many months. So this is a copy of an original evacuation letter that was delivered to the Van Riper family. This is actually on display at Deerhaven Park in the Visitor Center on the museum side right now. This family was one of the unfortunate few who only had 3 days to relinquish their land and property and get up and out. So construction then, after everybody was out, on the Seneca Ordinance Depot, which is what it was originally titled, began that July 1941. Now remember, again, this is Depression era, so we had people just infiltrate from everywhere because this is a good paying job. So they had families come up from as far south as Florida. There were families all throughout the Northeast, and then of course in our whole general area, families were flocking because this was good work for them. So originally they had planned on having a deadline of construction being finished in the spring of 1942. That deadline was actually moved up 3 times. The last deadline that they had set was December 15th. My personal thought on that is that somebody in Washington all of a sudden had a light bulb go off, and they went, wait, we're in the Northeast, winter's coming. So we can't have guys up on these igloos in sub-zero temperatures with wind chill factors. Not only that, we're pouring cement. We can't have cement cure when it's 22 degrees out. So what are we going to do? We're going to move that deadline up, and we're going to move that deadline up. And they had these men working 24/7 to try and complete these igloos. Well, that last deadline was December 15th of 41. And surprisingly and amazingly, these workers finished in record time on November 15th of 1941, and they had completed 500 igloos by that time in 4 months' time. So keep in mind, not only was this a blessing in disguise, because we all know that a couple weeks later Pearl Harbor got bombed and we were hurtled right into World War II, but keep in mind too that this was, again, Depression era, so we're talking 41, we're talking agricultural area, so if you had to basically be rich, let's just put it that way, in order to own an automobile back then. The average American family in Seneca County was still using horse and buggy, so these roads were still dirt roads. When the Army came in, they actually had to lay cement down for these roads. They had to run electric. They had to get a water plant going and sewage. They had to connect railroad lines from top to bottom so that they can crisscross from the lines that were already there originally and get actual product into the base. They had to build barracks. They needed administration buildings. They needed railroad platform drop-offs. There was everything that needed to be done, and these people finished it in 4 months' time, which is just amazing, you know, the American spirit, I'll tell you. So perhaps one of the most important things I think that happened was when the Army came in, they decided they needed to fence off these 10,000 acres, okay? A little over 10,000 acres. So they put up this 6-foot-high fence, 18 inches of angled barbed wire on top, because we want to make sure that everybody that is not supposed to be in here stays out, including all of the normal population. And we definitely don't want trespassers. Little did they realize back then that they were not only fencing out everybody they didn't want in, they were fencing in all of the wildlife that called that area home. So, lo and behold, we have a soldier on routine, just routine check. He's on security rounds. He's walking through the park. This is 1949. And he comes across this big, beautiful white buck. Well, he's mystified. He's shocked. He starts to turn around and head off, and he turns around and sees a white fawn. So, he just didn't even know how to deal with it. Forget routine security round. I'm heading hightailing it back to the commander in charge, because this, I can't even believe I just saw this. So commander in charge at the base, I don't even know what to say. Oh my gosh, you won't believe what I just said. Word spreads like wildfire, and the commander in charge, sight unseen, decides at that time to put a blanket protection over any and all white-tailed deer within that depot property. If not for that unprecedented move at that time by that commander, we would not have the herd we do today. So the depot continued to serve munitions, starting with that World War II, 1941 era, right through the Desert Storm of 1991. So we're talking February of 91. They then decided they were going to pull out, and they did that at the turn of the century. Then the land fell back to the county, which we're well aware if you lived in the area, and it was not until 2016 that the land was put up for private bid. Now, when that land sold, after its purchase, over 3,000 of those acres were intended to be preserved as an ecotourism site, not only for this beautiful white-tailed herd that we have now that nobody's ever seen anywhere else on the planet, but also the military history and the history of the land, which was so vast, and the military history alone, we felt, needed to have recognition, because there were decades there, let's face it. So a visitor center was built, and that was going to accommodate tour check-ins and give a military history museum area, a wildlife area where you can learn more about the wildlife. There's a gift shop that was included. And then guided tours were intended to encompass both that military history as well as the various wildlife within. So for this presentation, we're going to focus really on the white-tailed deer. So what is this? Okay, so let's talk about the whitetail. How does this even happen? What is it? Why? Well, whitetail are visible in the wild. It's not like they've never occurred. They do occur. We've heard of whitetail randomly being seen out west. They've been seen in Wisconsin. They've been seen down south in Virginia. They've been seen in Pennsylvania. They've been seen all out over New York State, actually, even far south as Long Island, and up north further from us. They've been seen out in the west part of New York State as well. So when you see a whitetail in the wild, though, you're normally far enough away you can't really tell, is this an albino or is this a leucistic deer? Now, we are aware of the deer within the park at Deer Haven are leucistic. So what does that even mean? Leucism is a recessive gene. So this gene gets passed down through the birthing process, much like a recessive gene does for humankind. So if you have a recessive gene for blue eyes or blonde hair or red hair or hazel eyes, it follows that same pattern but within the deer. A leucistic gene simply means that there is lacking pigmentation in the fur. There's nothing else different about these deer. Albino are a separate rare chromosome. They do have some frailties and defects. The leucistic deer do not. They would just be like somebody being birthed with blonde hair. So we're going to go through and I'm going to show you how this works. Leucism in any given herd of deer occurs 5% or less of the time. So we're ready to go to biology class. Are you ready? We're going to go to biology. All right, so leucistic deer, what is this? How does this happen? Well, if you have two dominant deer and they breed, they're obviously going to have dominant offspring. If, however, you have a dominant deer that breeds with a total white recessive deer, which is a whitetail, then you're going to have 4 dominant deer, which are all brown, but they're all carriers now. So there's that recessive gene going on there. If you then have a brown dominant that breeds with a brown that's carrying a recessive gene, you've got a 50-50 chance. So you're going to have 2 of the dominant, 2 of carriers or recessive gene. Then, of course, if you have your 2 carrier browns, you have 1 brown, you have 2 carrying recessive, and ta-da, you have a whitetail. Same thing with a brown carrier. Now, if they breed with the whitetail, you're going to have half and half. So you've got 2 carriers of recessive, and you're going to have 2 whites birthed. And then, of course, if you have 2 recessive birth or together, you're going to birth just all whitetail. Did you feel like you went back to biology? So within Deer Haven Park, again, this was 10,000 plus acres to begin with, so that recessive gene basically had a chance to enhance within that original Ordinance Depot property. Why? Because deer in general will stay within 1 to 3 mile radius of their birth, especially if 1, there's proper food available, 2, there's water available, fresh water, if there's not a lot of predators to threaten them, and if they know where to have their young, where their young can be safe. So is it really any different than you or I? Not really. You got a favorite gas station you like to go to? You got a favorite restaurant, grocery store? Where do you go for happy hour? It's the same type of thing. They kind of stay within that 1 to 3 mile radius of home. And with the white and the brown whitetail, there is no segregation. So they look at either congregating or mating. It doesn't matter to them what color they are. And when it comes to mating, they feel it's survival of the fittest just like any other time. So the does are still going to look for those macho guys, and the guys are still going to look for the beautiful chicks. So both does and bucks will mature for reproduction at roughly a year and a half years of age. And that'll vary a little bit, only depending on food availability and the population density of their herd. So does will impregnate during the rutting season, which we all know here begins like mid-November. There's a 200-day gestation period, which for them, they're pregnant right now, which just blows my mind because women who have been pregnant, we know what it's like when you're trying to feed yourself and your kid and you want everything right when you want it. Well, this is the season where they're going to be most hard pressed to find food. So they're going to be browsing and they're going to be looking for nourishment, not only for them, but for that fawn that's growing within them. So they're going to end up birthing at that point anywhere from end of May to end of June. Normally, a doe will birth one fawn on her first birthing, and then she can birth anywhere from 1 to 3 fawns thereafter. And depending on that recessive gene, those fawns can be either color wherever that gene lies. So sometimes you can have one of each color in the same birthing. So get ready for an awe moment here. So dominant gene fawn, obviously, they're going to be born no whitetail, so white under the tail, white under the belly, white under the throat, white around the eyes, and of course you're going to have these spots which help to blend them into their environment. Recessive gene fawns, on the other hand, are going to be all blended in. So recessive gene fawns still have all those spots. We just can't admire them and acknowledge them because the whole fur is all white. So for the first 4 weeks, the fawns are kept hidden in vegetation like you see them in this picture here. And that is done mostly to keep scent levels at a minimum, so they don't want to be, the moms don't want them to be found by predators. So having said that, if you are ever out in the wilderness and you are hiking and you come across something like this, please don't ever approach and let that fawn stand, because you're going to compromise it. That scent level will take off. Leave her be, and also please be aware that that doe is going to be very close by. Whether you see her or not does not matter. She knows you're there. She knows you were going to be there before you even got there. So the fawn will communicate with the doe with a light bleating noise, and the doe will grunt in communication to her fawn, but she's going to be nearby because she's feeding that fawn 4 to 5 times a day. So after that 4 weeks, or roughly a month, these fawns are up and beginning to accompany the doe for foraging. Very important that they learn this, because they're going to be weaned anywhere from 8 weeks to 6 months of age in, which is going to smack dab them right into winter. So in order to survive that first winter, they got to know where to get the feed. They need to know what to eat and where to get it from. So again, favorite grocery store, where are we going? Fawns will keep those spots throughout the summer, and that will help still blend them in with their environment. Those will eventually fade away as that winter coat comes in. That winter coat's going to be another darker color than what the fawn is going to be carrying through the summertime, and those spots are going to fade right out, especially with that undercoat coming in to keep them nice and warm for winter. So here we see a doe. She had youngsters of each color. Males will accompany their doe for usually the first year. Females, on the other hand, will have a tendency to accompany that doe for up to 2 years. So now I want to talk a little bit about camouflage with these guys. Now the thought process for whitetail, so for all reasoning, they believe they blend in and that you can't see them. So here's a good example of a whitetail in the winter time, which is wonderful. If you had no clue whitetail existed and you zipped down the highway next to that fence and you looked in, you probably would miss her altogether. Well, let's take a look at another couple of examples here. So here we have some snow thaw time. These are whites in snow thaw time, and they're thinking they blend right into the tree line. Now, don't say anything out loud, but I want you to make a mental note quietly to yourselves how many whitetail you see in that picture. And again, they feel like you can't see me because I'm blending into the tree line. So let's compare to a brown whitetail, same time of year. And this is a brown buck. Brown buck in the tree line, blending in very nicely. Again, if you drove by and you weren't looking for deer, you'd probably go right past him and not even notice that he was there. So let's compare those two. Which are more camouflage? If you saw 3 whitetail in that first photo, you were right. How many people saw 3 whitetail? Anybody see less than 3? 2? 1? 2? Anybody see 4 or 5? If so, we want to know where happy hour was. Okay, so let's look at summertime. So very different blending in or not capabilities to their environment. Obviously the white are standing out a lot. The brown, however, is blended right into that tree line. You might not even see him if you were going by. So what's even more rare or rarer, there's a Scrabble word for you, rarer than the leucistic deer are what they call a piebald. Now piebald is a blending of colors. Think pinto pony. It's a blending in any degree of the brown and the white. These happen in less than 2% of any leucistic recessive gene herd. So you need to have that leucistic gene in there, but keep in mind that that only happens 5% of the time. So now these only happen 2% of the time. And I want to show you what I feel is the epitome of a piebald. This beautiful young creature here. This photo was taken by a lady by the name of Maureen Seaberg. I believe she was a photographer at the time for National Geographic. She was kind enough to allow us to share her photo. And this little guy was taken, believe it or not, on Long Island. Beautiful. I don't know if it's a male or a female yet. We don't know, but she's absolutely gorgeous. So there have only been 2 piebalds in the history of Deer Haven Park. So Deer Haven Park opened in the fall of 2016. In 2016, we saw our first piebald, and we were so enthusiastic. It was like seeing a whitetail for the first time all over again. We were so stoked, and unfortunately, through that winter, we don't know if we lost her or if she just decided she was going to meander away, but we no longer saw her. However, we saw our second piebald, and we were super excited, at Deer Haven Park in the fall of 2022. Now this little girl, look at her little raccoon eyes and her little blaze down her nose. She is so adorable. And when we spotted her, we were just as stoked. In fact, it took me some convincing to actually let everybody else realize that she was really a piebald. She is under protection at Deer Haven Park, and she actually did make it through her first winter. We did see her last spring, and then we saw her again last fall, and I am happy to report that our assistant operations manager at the park did see her again 2 weeks ago. So we hope that she continues to be healthy and continue to produce and make us some more baby piebalds. So, let's discuss, I want you to be introduced to some of the other wildlife at the park, because it's just amazing, there is so much there in wildlife. And this is one of our resident beavers. Now, these beavers have their dam set up across Reeder Creek, which goes right through the middle of the park. These beavers, all beavers, but we like to tout about ours, these beavers' architectural skills are second only to that of humans. Let me repeat that. That's got to sink in. Beavers' architectural skills are second only to that of human beings. We're talking no college, we're talking no drafting papers, no compasses, okay? These guys are amazing. They build their dams to protect their lodges, because when you've got kits and they're swimming along and you've got bald eagles and osprey and red-tailed hawks, they're going to swoop down and grab those kits right out of the water, no problem. Nice dinner for them. So these dams are built to protect their lodges, and these lodges are built like mini condominiums. It is amazing what they do with these lodges. So they back that water up, and then they have an entrance that they can get to a lodge underneath the water, so it keeps everybody nice and safe. You've got an in and out. Not only do they do that, but they've got a second floor, so they build a mini condominium. They've got a second floor, and on that second floor they have their birthing room, they have their pantry where they keep all their food, and they have their living room with the widescreen TV. So, in addition to that, they have a little attic, and they don't store 500 years worth of stuff up there. They've got a little attic because they need a little chimney because they want fresh air circulating. Not only that, but then they'll go to the base of their stream or creek or wherever they're building this lodge, and they'll dig up nice dirt and clay from the base of that waterway, and they'll plaster it all the way around the outside of that lodge like you would plaster your house. It is amazing. So, a couple of years ago at the park, we had a situation where we love going to see the dam, and we love being able to see the beavers when they decide they're going to present themselves for us. But we had a very wet spring, and the park was starting to open. We had a flooded tour road. So what are we going to do? It's not dissipating because it's raining, it's raining, it's raining. We're going to have tour buses coming through. We can't go through a flooded road. So administration decided, okay, we're going to take a nice fine footprint here. We don't have a choice. We got to take out just the corner of this dam and let this water recede so we can get our tour people through. Well, these beavers, I don't know. It took them, probably a half a minute to figure out what we'd done. And we've got a picture here of the tour road. I want you to take a peek at this and enjoy. This is going to show you exactly what happened, because within 5 hours, I think, they were building that dam back up. Hopefully we'll have sound to this. We should.